Good morning and welcome to Tuesday's Maths.
Good morning. So yesterday we started looking at division and we looked at long division and short division, and we started looking at the relationship between the two things, so that when you go to secondary and if they show you long division, you're not sat there thinking, I don't understand this, I don't know what this is. Okay, we want to make sure that we prepare you as much as we possibly can for September. So today is following on from that. We're still going to be looking at long division and short division, but we're now going to look at questions that have got more remainders. Okay, so we're going to be looking at how to write remainders as decimals and fractions. Let's begin. So in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at remainders. So a remainder is the bit that's left over and when you can't divide a number and get a whole answer. So for example, 5 divided by 2, you're not going to be able to divide that. If we had 5 pencils and 2 people, we wouldn't be able to share the whole thing out. People would get 2 pencils each, but would still have 1 left over, and that is called our remainder. Now, there's 3 different ways that you can write your remainder. You can write R, and then the remainder. You can write it as a fraction, or you can write it as a decimal. Now, it doesn't really matter a lot of the time in arithmetic, for example, which one you use, especially in an arithmetic test. It doesn't matter which answer you give. However, as we're moving forward and our maths is getting more complicated, especially next year, you want to be able to choose the most appropriate way of writing that remainder. Is the best way to write it as a fraction? Is the best way to write it as a decimal? Or actually, can I just leave it as remainder 6? And there's different contexts for each one. So let's say that I'm talking about money. So let's say that Robert raised £354 for charity and Harriet raised £15. How many times as much did Robert raise compared to Harriet? So I want to do 354. I want to divide it by 15 and see how lots of 15 go into 354. Now, if I'm talking in money, what do you think would be best for my remainder? Would I want it as a decimal, a fraction, or a remainder? Well, I'm probably going to want it as a decimal because money is written in decimals, isn't it? £2 and 33 pence would be 2.33. So if I'm working in money, I probably want a decimal as my remainder. What about if I was looking at people? So I said there are 632 people, say, and they want to go onto, there's 14 people per bus. How many buses would they need? Well, if I'm trying to do a number and I'm sharing it into how many seats on a bus, let's say my answer, for example, was 33 remainder 6. So that tells me I need 33 buses that are going to be full, but I'm going to have 6 people left over that are going to have to go on another bus. So altogether, I'm going to need 34 buses. If I said that as a fraction or a decimal, that might not be as helpful. If I said I need 33.5 buses, so I need 33 and a half buses, it doesn't make as much sense, okay? You really need to look at what context your question is in. If you're going to do something about length or distances, or even something that you're going to carry on calculating for a step B, you might want to look at a fraction. So you might want to say it's 1 1/5 as long as this. Okay, so there's different contexts, which one's the best one. Sometimes it might just be personal preference, and it might be you prefer to write them as fractions because you're more confident with fractions, or you might want to write it as a decimal because you're more confident with decimals, and that's completely fine. But sometimes different contexts call for different things. Right, let's get started.
Right then, problem number 1. Dinesh sells 25 jumpers, each for the same amount, and makes a total of £730. How much does each jumper sell for? So the calculation we are doing is that's £730, and we're sharing it between the 25 jumpers to find out how much each jumper is worth. So have a go at working out your 25 times table first of all. Should be nice and easy. It's my favourite times table, the 25 times table. And then have a go at short division, and then have a go at long division. Okay, or you might even want to do long division first if you found actually you prefer it. Okay, just have a go. Pause the video and then we'll go through both of them. So you should, if you've done it right, you should end up with a remainder. Okay, so the first things first then, we're going to write down the 25 times table, which would be 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, 200, etc, etc. Nice and easy. So, can we do 7 divided by 25? No. Can we do 73 divided by 25? Yes, it would go in 2 times, which would be 50. So take those away and you would end up with 23. Bring the 0 down. So you've got 231s. What's 231s divided by 25? Well, it would go in 9 times, which would be 225, and you would be left over with 5. So here, we could just write R for remainder and 5, but today I don't want us to do that. So, one way that you can do this, and you have done this before, is you introduce the decimal point. So you put a decimal point in your answer and a decimal point here, because as you know, if you add a decimal point and zeros after a number, it doesn't change that number. So I'm going to add a 0. Now, this time, rather than now saying remainder 5, we're now going to call this 5 ones, but then we're going to bring this 0 down, like this. And now we're going to say it's 50 tenths. Okay, so we're now going to look at this as 50 tenths. How many times can you divide 50 by 25? How many times does it go in? Well, it goes in twice, because 2 times 25 is 50. So you put the 2 up here because you've divided it 2 times. And then there would be nothing left over. And you would stop at 29.2. So this is the other way. This is the short division. Hopefully you can see, same idea. So you would rename it as 73. There's your 73. And you could divide it 2 times. You could divide it 2 times. Your remainder would be 23. Your remainder would be 23, which you can divide 9 times, which you can divide 9 times. Your remainder was then 5. So here, rather than pulling this 0 down here, all we've done is we've just renamed that 5 ones is 50 tenths, and we put it here. And then it's the same thing. 50 divided by 25 is 2. Same answer. Okay, so it's just a little extension to do decimals. You just got to remember to put decimal point, add your zeros, and then you carry on as normal. Right, next problem then. Savita travels 730 kilometres to visit her grandma. Lily travels 25 kilometres to visit her grandma. How many times Lily's distance does Savita travel? So we need to find out how many times does 25 go into 730. So what's 730 divided by 25? Right, answer time then. So first things first, how many times can you divide 7 by 25? You can't. So then we look at 73. Well, we know that would be 50, which is 2 lots of 25, so the 2 would go up there. Work out your difference, which would be 23. Bring this 0 down, so now we're looking at 231s. Then we're going to do, how many 25s go into 230? Well, it would be 9, which is 225, and our remainder is 5. Hopefully you've spotted that this is the same calculation. But this time, I want you to represent the remainder as a fraction. So, answer time then. The first bit is exactly the same as you just did in the previous step. However, when we get here, last time we put decimal points and then we made the remainder a decimal. But this time I want it as a fraction. So this time I'm going to say, right, I've got my remainder of 5. So I've got 5 left over. And I still need to share that 5 between this 25. So I was going to share this 5 miles between the 25 journeys. So 5 divided by 25, because it's 5 divided by 25, 5 over 25. Remember that line means divide. So we can write this as 5 out of 25, 5 divided by 25. So we can write that as a fraction. Can we simplify that though? Yes, we can, because 5 25ths divided all by 5 is the same as 1/5. So you could actually say that the journey is 29 1/5 times as long. If we were doing short division, we could have written it as a remainder 5, but really, mathematically wise, remainder 5s aren't really that useful, unless we're talking about whole objects like people. So really, we want to probably turn them into decimals or fractions. So it would be 5 over 25 because it was remainder 5, and you still need to divide it by that 25, which would be 1/5. So it'd be 29 and 1/5. Right, here is your next question then. 354 divided by 15. Now, I don't want you to work anything out for this. I just want you to pause the video and see if you could explain, either in your head or out loud, explain what is happening in all of these separate situations. So here you've got it written as a remainder, here you've got it as a fraction, and here you've got it as a decimal. And I want you to try and explain how these are the same thing, they're the same sum, they're the same answer, but how have you got the different representations of that remainder? Off we go. Okay, so hopefully for the first one on the left, with remainder 9, you could explain that this is probably the most simple way of representing a remainder. And you're going to use this kind of remainder for things like people or boxes or chocolates or things that can't really be split up. So for example, it might be there's 354 chocolates and they need to go into boxes of 15. How many boxes could you fill? Well, you would fill 23 full boxes and then you'd have 9 chocolates left over. So depending on the wording of the question, if it asked you for how many full boxes could you make, it would be 23. If it asked you how many boxes would you need altogether, then you'd need 24 because you need an extra box for that remainder 9. The middle one is probably for something like distance, or if you want to do any further calculations. So it's 23 and 9/15. And you've got that because you had a remainder of 9 that still needed to be divided by 15. So you write it as 9 over 15. You can simplify that by dividing it by 3 to get 23 and 3/5. And for the third one, the one on the right, decimals. This potentially could be for money, so your answer actually could be £23.60, or sometimes for further calculations, a decimal answer is easier for you to use. So for this one, you had the remainder of 9, you put decimal points and a 0, and then you move that 0 down to make 90 tenths. You did 90 divided by 15, which is 90, because you times 15 by 6, so then you had 6 times, so the answer was 23.6. Okay then, for this next question, you can use short multiplication or long multiplication. You could do one of each, I really don't mind. But I would like you to write this as a fraction and as a decimal. Now, you might work it out as a fraction and then realise you know the decimal equivalent, or you might work it out as a decimal and realise you know the fraction equivalent. So actually, you might not need to work these out 2 times. Okay, it's completely up to you which way you'd like to do it. Pause the video and have a go. Right then, answer time. So for either one of these, and actually we've done long division for both of these, but you could have used short division, your remainder is going to be 5. Okay, so it's going to divide 5 times and you can have 5 left over. So you could write this as 5R5, 5 remainder 5. However, that's like we said before, if you want to do more calculations, that's not the best way to leave it. So, for the fraction on the left, you're then going to take that remainder 5 and you still need to divide it by 20. So you're going to write it as 5 over 20 or 5/20. Simplified is a quarter. So your final answer is 5 1/4. Now, hopefully you remember what a quarter is equivalent to as a decimal, and you know that a quarter is 0.25 because a quarter of 100 is 25. So hopefully you know that 5 1/4 is the same as 5.25. Now, to prove that, on the right-hand side, you've got the decimal version. So again, you've already found out 20 goes into 105 5 times with a remainder of 5. Put your decimal point, move your 0 down. So now you've got 50 divided by 20. Well, 20 goes into 50 2 times, which is 40. And then you've got a remainder of 10. You need to get another 0 this time. So this time we're going into the hundredths column. Bring another 100 down. So you've got 100 hundredths. 100 divided by 20 is 5, which is 100, so there is a difference of 0. So your answer is 5.25, which, as we know, is 5 1/4. Well done if you got those right. Okay, for this next question, I want you to work this out, and then I want you to think about which way of representing the remainder is the most appropriate. And I'm not going to give you a context this time, but hopefully you will see which way of representing the remainder is the best way, is the most appropriate way. So have a go at working it out as a decimal remainder first of all, and then try a fraction. I want you to tell me which way is the most appropriate. Off we go. Well, hopefully you can see if you're doing this as a decimal, it's going to end up being a recurring decimal. It's going to be 0.66666666, and it's just going to keep going. So if I wanted to do any further maths after this and carry on with this calculation, it's going to be really difficult with a recurring decimal. It makes it really, really hard. So the most appropriate way to do this calculation is to do it as a fraction, which would be 20 over 30, which you could simplify to 2/3. And now if there was a set question B and I wanted to work out what 3 lots of the answer were, for example, rather than having to do 25.66666666 times 3, which is going to be very difficult, I can do 770 divided by 30, 25 2/3, and then times that, and that's going to be much easier to work with. Okay then, last little bit for today. I want you to have a go at these 4 calculations, and I want you to think about, well, I want you to have a go at showing the remainders in all different ways, which is going to be easier than you think, don't worry, because for some of them you're going to think, oh, I know that a half is the same as 0.5, for example. And then afterwards, I'm going to give you a context for each problem, and I want to see whether you would think remainder, decimal, or fraction. Off we go. Right then, answer time. So I've used short division because personally it's my favourite, but that's because I'm confident with finding the difference between 2 numbers. If you're not, then long division might be easier for you. So for the first one, my answer was 12 and then remainder 21. If I put my zeros and renamed the 21 ones into 210 tenths, 210 divided by 42 is 5. So this is 12.5. Now, I didn't even need to work this out as a fraction because actually I already knew that 12.5, or 0.5, same as a half, so it's 12 and a half. For the next one, I got 23.25. And again, I didn't need to work this out as a fraction because actually I know that 0.25 is the same as a quarter. So it's 23 and a quarter, or 23 remainder 10, because it was that 10 that I renamed. If I had worked it out as a fraction, I was renaming that 10, so it would have been 10 divided by 40, which would simplify to a quarter. The next one was 42.75. 0.75 is the same as 3/4, so 42 and 3/4. And just as a remainder, I was just renaming 18, so it'd be 42 remainder 18. And then the last one was 12.28. As a remainder, it's just 12 remainder 7. So then use that to work it out as a fraction is 12 and 7 over 25. You've still got to divide that 7 by 25, and that does not simplify. So that would be your answer. Right. For the first one, if I was talking about money, I've got £525 to divide by 42 people. What would you give me as the answer? Decimal, fraction, or remainder? Well, if it's money, you want to go for decimals, but you wouldn't say it's £12.5. You would say £12.50, and you would put that 0 in the hundredths column to make £12.50. For the second one then, if I said that there was 930 let's have pieces of cake. Or I'll have whole cakes, 930 cakes. And I'm splitting these 930 cakes between 40 people. And I want to share them equal. And I want to have an equal amount of cakes each. What would you say then if I had 930 cakes and I'm sharing them between 40 people? Well, for this one, I'd probably say that each person gets 23 and a quarter of cake. So it gets 23 whole cakes and a quarter of a cake, because it's just easier rather than saying, oh, everyone gets 23 cakes and then there's 10 left over. Well, that's not really very helpful. And rather than saying, well, there's 23 cakes and then everyone gets 0.25. Well, it's just easier to say 23 and a quarter, because you would convert that 0.25 into a quarter anyway. For the next one then, if I was talking about something whole like people, something that can't be split up or shared, what would we say? Well, I think we'd probably keep it as 42 remainder 18. So I can fit 42 groups of people into a coach or a classroom, and I'll have 18 left over that need to go on another one. Right, really, really well done today. That is not easy, and hopefully you found it all right. So well done. See you tomorrow.